Shalom, shalom, shalom. Everybody that's online, if you can hear us clearly, just let us know. Just put a one in the chat. If you're on Facebook, if you're on YouTube, just put a one, number one in the chat. You understand? So we can be able to know if everybody can hear us really good. And we're going to get the lecture started. Let us know if you can hear us. We live right now. Mark Doc, if somebody can pull up this page and see, just turn it on and see if you can hear it as well. If everybody can hear, just let us know. Just give a one in the chat. Let's get a one in the chat. You got it on, Mark Doggett?
Yeah, we can rock.
You can hear?
I see ones in the chat too.
Okay, most I encourage.
Somebody send me a link.
Mark Doggett shared it on his page. It's the I.S.U.P.K South Carolina page. It's No Cowards on YouTube, No Cowards South Carolina on YouTube, and I.S.U.P.K South Carolina on Facebook. Everybody got ones in the chat. We should be good up here. All right, we can go ahead and do it, man. Hold on. Give me one more second. All right, so of course, you can just click right here. So both of y'all, all three of us, like, just look at the computer screen so you can tell if you're in the computer. You're up there. So that you stand back as far as you can so you can see yourself in the picture. All right, but other than that, we're good to go. All right, folks. All right, we can clap it up one time, man. Again, like the brother said, we're the I.S.U.P.K, the Israelite School of Universal and Practical Knowledge, started out of 1 West 125th Street, Harlem, New York, under Commander General YAHANNA. You understand? What we here today, what you'll witness today, man, is a lecture by two powerful priests and officers in the I.S.U.P.K, Officer of 5,000 Nataza and Officer of 50 Thabawan. You understand? These brothers have put in countless hours gathering resources and evidence and history, you understand, on this wicked, disgusting religion called Christianity that has plagued, you understand, blacks, Hispanics, and Native American Indians ever since we got off from slave ships 400 years ago. You understand? So if you could give your undivided attention, take notes, you understand, and take heed to what these brothers is going to bring out, because contrary to popular belief, the problems and the conditions that you see in the black community are, if not all, you understand, are mostly solely, you understand, is a problem that has occurred as a direct correlation to Christianity. Right. You understand? Christianity, the lecture is called Christianity versus Revolution, man, because Christianity is what subdued the black man's spirit, man, right, to have a revolution against this oppressor that has been slaughtering us for 400 years, man. Right. So y'all make sure y'all take notes. How we gonna do this is we're gonna have Officer Nataza. He's gonna come up and he's gonna bring out the information that he has. We'll have an intermission and then Officer Thabawan will finish it out. If you have any questions that's on topic, what I tell you to do is go ahead and try to write your questions down, whether it's in your phone, and at the end of the lecture, we'll get those questions. It's like something like and share. Kind of Most High Christ. Also, if you could go on your social media, Facebook and YouTube, like and share the lecture, so we can proliferate this truth throughout the whole world. You understand? If you have any concerns, you direct yourself to Shamar. Shamar will take care of any concerns that you may have. You understand? And other than that, we're gonna have food provided. Y'all gonna be able to eat, drink, have water. Restroom. We have one restroom in the back, two restrooms in the lounge, in the restaurant area on the other side of the building. You understand? If you need to get up and handle any business you got to handle to go ahead and do it. Also, if you could put your cell phones on vibrate. You understand? We don't want any disruptions, disrupting what these priests and prophets have built up for y'all today. And other than that, we're going to bring it out, man, so we can get a hand clap for priests and officers. Get that brother a hand. We're at the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, started on 1 West 125th Street in Harlem, New York, under Commander General YAHANNA. And today, and this is a very special lecture, you understand, because Christianity has plagued brothers and sisters in the South so heavily, and we have no clue or no understanding as to why
You understand? The conditions are the way that they are. You understand? And that's why the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge under Commander General YAHANNA has been commissioned to come out and teach you the truth, which is the reason why we have the classes that we have. You understand? Which is the reason why we provide you with the information that we do. You understand? So that we can wake you up to the understanding of the truth. Today's lecture is called Revolution versus Christianity. We're getting ready to talk about basically how Christianity, which is a very demonic, a lot of people don't understand this, but Christianity is a very demonic religion, okay, that's proliferated such an evil on blacks, Hispanics, and Native Indians for such a long time. You know what I'm saying? And it's caused the condition of us to be so bad, and even in this time period. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of a trickle down effect. It's like we were brought into Christianity as slaves, and then now today the things that we do that we don't understand actually comes from that time, comes from that implementing of Christianity on our lives. Okay, so we want to go into basically some history. The history that we're going to go into is going to show you how rebellions in slavery, in the times of slavery, basically got destroyed because of what you call black informant. A lot of y'all don't know what black informant is. I want to show you what black informant is. Black informant is something that was taught to us by Christianity, by our oppressors, by white society. Okay? So I'm going to show you how that affected us even to this day. If I can get them lights, we can get the first slide. We're going to get right on into it. All right? Let me get that first slide real quick, one more time. All right? Revolution versus Christianity. How Christianity influenced disloyalty that in turn destroyed the plight of black people to be free in America. All right? Obviously, by Officer Nataza, that's me. And Officer Thabawan, please give him a hand. Officer Thabawan is going to be doing this lecture with me. Very powerful brother, very smart brother also. All right, of course, under Commander General YAHANNA. Big shout out to Commander General YAHANNA. Give him a hand, man. If it wasn't for Commander General YAHANNA, if it wasn't for Commander General YAHANNA, lectures like this would not be, be happening all around the earth. That's right. All right, next slide for me. What we will be discussing. This lecture serves as knowledge authorized by the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge to educate you on the destruction of black people in America by the hands of the Christian belief system. Our goal is to expose you to the history of the oppressive evil nature of Christianity and how throughout centuries it has destroyed our efforts to be a free people. All right? Everybody familiar with this picture? This is a picture of Nat Turner. Can everybody see this pretty well? All right? Go ahead and read this. Nat Turner, first off, before I read this, Nat Turner is a very well-known revolutionary, of course, that fought for something that is very important, but just the way that he did it was not the way that, of course, the Lord would have wanted him to do it. However, his plight was very honorable. Okay? But we're going to get right on into it. The Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831 in Southampton, Virginia, is the most well-known, successful slave-led rebellion ultimately. All right? Turner was captured alive, and before his execution, he recounted his events to Tom Gray. If you could move that over just a little bit because it's kind of blurry right here. So likely, we're gonna get back to it. Move it over that way, so. Yeah, can you adjust the lens just a little bit? It just looks kind of blurry off to the right side. Yeah, might have to. Can you do that? Just adjust it to get some clarity. Right, it looked like this when you adjusted it like that. There we go. I think it's a little bit better. I can do that. All right. He recounted the events to Thomas Gray, who officially recorded Turner's confession, assuming the credibility of Turner's confession to Gray. All right. Hold on one second. Your head is in the way out. Confession. assuming the credibility of Turner's confession to Gray. Turner's version of events reveals the great lengths he went in order to keep his plan secret and how luck was sometimes necessary to avoid other slaves preemptively revealing information to whites. Turner believed God had commanded him to rebel and that he was to not tell anyone until he received the sign. All right? When he received the sign, he told four in whom he had the greatest confidence: Henry, Hart, Nelson, and Sam. Right? These are four other slaves, of course. They worked together to come up with plans, but rejected them all. Turner then received another sign that told him they could wait no longer. All right? So Nat Turner believed that there was a sign from heaven, there was a sign from God that told him that it was time to go against his enemies, to go against our oppressor. Okay? Which of course the end result, you know what I'm saying, was it shows you exactly how that turned out. All right, they worked together to come up with plans, but rejected them all. Turner then received another sign that told him they could wait no longer. So the group agreed on August 20th, 1831, to meet the next evening over dinner to finalize a plan. When the five met, they were joined by Will and Jack. Turner provided no explanation as to how Will and Jack came to be invited, except that Jack was only a tool in the hands of Hart. They all agreed to start the insurrection that night, Sunday, at the house of Turner's master, and in fact did so. Their killing spree began and spread. Other slaves joined as they went along. The group numbered 15 men, then about 40, then 50 or 60 members. So you have all these men that Turner gathered up, and they were going to go out and they were going to basically slaughter white society, white people, for the crimes or for slavery. Okay, go to the next slide, please. All right. Eventually, the group encountered white resistance that forced the group to separate. All right. So they started getting some pushback. Turner sent two men, Jacob and Nat, to find Henry, Sam, Nelson, and Hart, and tell them to meet him where they had dinner the Sunday before. By Wednesday, and there's a reason why I have this in yellow, because in anything that you see in yellow is going to show you some sort of disloyalty that happened between black slaves. All right? By Wednesday, when no one had joined him and he saw white men riding around looking like they were searching for someone, Turner concluded that Jacob and Nat had been taken and compelled to betray. All right? He hid in the woods for 6 weeks and was only discovered due to a dog that came across his cave where Turner had a piece of meat. When the dog passed by the cave again, this time accompanied by two slaves, the dog alerted to the cave. Turner thought he was discovered and so made himself known. The two slaves ran off and Turner knew they would betray him. So he left that hiding space and was free for 2 more weeks before being discovered. All right. The 2 points I want to get out of that, just that particular thing, is that he already knew that there was going to be an act of betrayal. All right. And I'm showing you this because later on I'm going to show you why this betrayal happens. I'm going to show you how Christianity is the reason why a slave would go and tell on another slave to get them arrested or to get them put to death. All right. Next slide. Denmark, BC. Y'all should know about Denmark, BC. That's a prominent figure in Carolina history, especially out in Charleston, South Carolina. All right. 1771, 14-year-old Denmark, BC was transported from St. Thomas to Cape Francis by slave trader Captain Joseph Vesey. Upon a return trip to Captain Francis, Captain Vesey was forced to reclaim Denmark, who his master said was suffering from epileptic fits. Denmark accompanied Captain Vesey on his trading voyages until the captain returned to Charleston, never again showing signs of epilepsy. All right. In 1799, Vesey won the lottery and brought his freedom for $600. Now, this is kind of a little bit off topic, but man, this is crazy right here. as a black man and as a slave, it's just absolutely crazy that you have to win a lottery just to buy your damn freedom, man. And this man had to win a lottery just to buy his freedom. So every time I see this, like personally, every time I see that, I'm just like, man, that is crazy. All right. He could not purchase the freedom of his wife and children. However, and some claim that this fact motivated his crusade to destroy the institution of slavery. So in other words, they believe that what inspired him to want to rebel against white Charlestonians or just white people in general for slavery was because of the fact that he was able to buy his freedom, but he was not able to buy the freedom of his family. All right. BC joined the new formed African Methodist Episcopal Church in 1817. He became a class leader, preaching to small group in his home during the week. White Charlestonians constantly monitored the African church, disrupting services and arresting members. An angry BC began preaching from the Old Testament, particularly Exodus, and taught followers that they were the new Israelites, the chosen people whose enslavement God would punish with death. The slaves knew they were Israelites.
Right.
The slaves, we've been known we was Israelites for a very long time. That's why we sung them old Negro spirituals, swing low, sweet chariot, right, wading in the water, follow the open door, all of the different songs we sung. Those origins of those songs come from us knowing and believing we were Israelites. You understand? So he knew this because he knew that our conditions were the way that our conditions were matched up with the way that the ancient Hebrew Israelites' conditions was in Egypt. All right. Next slide. Denmark, BC sought to strike Charleston, South Carolina in 1822. Peter Poyas was BC's second in command. All right. Poyas identified house slaves as the most likely of betrayers. Poyas is his second man. Poyas was a smart man. Poyas is smart. Poyas said, I don't trust house slaves. This was his reasoning for not trusting house slaves. This is what Poyas said. He said, it's like I'm waiting for you to get done with that.
You got it.
This is what Poyas said. Poyas said he told one of his recruiting agents to take care and don't mention it to those waiting men who receive presents of old coats from their masters, or they'll betray us. I will speak to them. I'm going to read that one more time. He said, I told one of the recruiting agents to take care and don't mention it to those waiting men who receive presents of old coats. Why would he say that? The reason why he would say that is because he know that any black slave that's receiving gifts from their master is going to betray. They're going to betray. They're going to snitch. Why? Because they got it good. They get in the shoes. They get in the new shoe. The masters pass me down shoes. They get in the coat. They get in his new hat. They get in special treatment. You're going to find out that right there. You're going to find out that right there is a psychology in Christianity. It was used to divide us. It was used to cause us to betray each other. Right. They knew, the master knew why he was giving these certain slaves this and that, the old coats, these hand-me-down things, and why he was treating the other one so bad. Because he wanted to create division, because if we're divided as a nation, what happens? We fall. That's in the Bible. All right? Notwithstanding Poyas' command, some slaves ignored his instruction because they knew of how slaves willing to poison their masters' wells. The attack was planned for July 16, 1822, and estimated 9,000 slaves had been enlisted. That is crazy right there. Some people still ignored it. Some people said, I'm still going to go tell certain people because there's certain people I trust. There was some compromising going on. They didn't want to obey orders. In I.S.U.P.K, we obey orders for a reason. That's right. They didn't want to obey orders. It says the attack was planned for July 16, 1822, an estimated 9,000 slaves. And 9,000 willing slaves that was ready to fight because of the brutality and the enslavement of their people. 9,000 people. Next slide, please. And by the way, these excerpts come from Andrea L. Dennis. She wrote a documentary called A Snitch in Time. I got all of the information on it. If you need it at the end of this lecture, then please get up with me and I'll give you that information. It's also on the bottom. I don't know if y'all can see it. but it's also on the bottom of these slides. All her information, so you can go find it. All right? Authorities detected the plan in the last week of May when a slave named William Paul tried to recruit Peter Devaney, a house slave. Devaney betrayed the group by consulting free black named William Pencil, who advised Devaney to tell his master, which he did. All right? I'll read it again. Devaney betrayed the group by consulting a free black named William Pencil, who advised Devaney to tell his master. All right, so Devaney is brought in on this plan, but Devaney decides, I'm going to go tell this man, but this man is advising him to go tell the master. Go snitch. Oh, don't tell me that. You need to go tell your master. Right. You know? However, Devaney was only able to give authorities a bare bones plan, meaning he couldn't really give them the exact plans. He could only give them a rough draft of what was really going to happen. Recruits knew only the name of their assigned leader in general plans. Only leaders of the plot knew details in order to prevent the arrest or betrayal of one person from resulting in the collapse of the entire plan. For 2 weeks, VC continued to plan and the government authorities investigated. So VC moved the date of attack. On Friday, before the new scheduled day, the group was betrayed again. This time by a slave who knew plans and some names. His name was George Wilson. All right? George Wilson, another slave and leader in the African church, also provided information. All right? Another act of betrayal, man. Betrayal after betrayal after betrayal. Why is this happening? We're going to get into it. I'm going to show you why it's happening. But I'm just showing you some examples so far of it happening. Go to the next slide, please. Y'all follow me? Results of a failed plot. VC of 5 leaders were tried, convicted, and executed on July 2nd, 1822. Only one leader confessed. All others remained silent. Devaney and Wilson were emancipated by the legislature and given lifetime pensions. Pencil received $1,000 in a tax exemption. Y'all hear that? For snitching or for getting them caught for this revolution that they was getting ready to start, they received $1,000 in a tax pension. What does that sound like today? That sounds like what did I say? A payoff, right? That's exactly what it is, and that's exactly what happens today in today's time. Just imagine your Christian leaders right now getting paid off to keep you blind to the truth. Right. It's the same thing. Or somebody talking about turning you in, like some Israelite groups teach that they'll turn you in for some money, man. There are some groups that'll turn you in for $1,000 in the tax exemption. That's right. You understand? Not in the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, though. Under Commander Junior YAHANNA. Keep going. During the spring and summer of 1800, this is Prosser. I don't know if y'all know about Gabriel Prosser, but also another prominent figure that tried to lead a revolution up in Virginia. All right? Prosser planned his rebellion. By August, several thousand slaves had been enlisted. On the day it was to begin, August 30th, 2 slaves, Tom and Pharaoh, betrayed the plot to their master, who in turn told authorities. Another act of betrayal, man. The governor called out the militia. Prosser did not know of the betrayal, and that night approximately 1,000 slaves gathered. A thunderstorm prevented them from attacking when the storm washed out points of entry into the city. So Prosser postponed the attack. He fled by boat, but was located in Norfolk, Virginia, on September 25th, 1800, by 2 Negroes who ultimately betrayed him. Prosser and many co-conspirators were arrested before they could reassemble to carry out the insurrection. So there you go, another betrayal, and then that's another revolution that went downhill and eventually fell because of betrayal, because of disloyalty. That's right. You understand? Because of snitching, all right? Because of black informing, all right? Next slide, please. Both before and after the planned Prosser and VC rebellions, Slaves betrayed and advanced many lesser known insurrections. So now what I'm about to show you is some lesser known insurrections. You know about Denmark Vesey, you know about Nat Turner, you know about Gabriel Prosser, you know about just a few of those, those main things. But then here's a couple of betrayed insurrections right here. An early instance is the betrayal by will of a conspiracy by slaves in Surrey and James City counties, Virginia, in 1710. A few years later, in 1713, in Goose Creek, South Carolina, a slave named Job revealed a conspiracy. In Charlestown, South Carolina, in 1740, this is when Charleston was called Charlestown, of course, named Job revealed a conspiracy. 1740, a slave named Peter revealed a conspiracy 24 hours before it was to be initiated, allowing slaveholders to capture the rebels and execute them. In 1835, in South Carolina, Georgia, and Louisiana, domestic slaves revealed slave plots against whites. In October 1837, in Rapids Parish, Louisiana, Lewis, a slave, revealed a conspiracy of slaves and free blacks that was set to begin in Alexandria, Louisiana. His revelation led the conspiracy to be squelched. The state freed Lewis and rewarded him with $500 to establish himself in some distant community where he would be safe. This sounds like a Judas and Yahweh situation. Right. Sold him out, man. Keep going. Next slide. In the early days of slavery, whites did not expose slaves to religion for a variety of reasons, including the belief that slaves did not need religion and the fear that slaves would learn to read and write. So they didn't expose us to religion because they felt like we didn't need it, but also they didn't want us to learn and write. All right, they want us to learn how to read and write. All right, but eventually, whites believed that slaves who learned religion would be more subservient, and that religion could be a useful tool in maintaining the institution of slavery. I'm telling y'all, this is right here. This is all of this right here is real information. All right, I'm gonna read it again. It said eventually whites believed that slaves who learned religion would be more subservient. You know what the word subservient means? Submissiveness. You'll be willing to serve. Right. All right, and that religion could be a useful tool in maintaining the institution of slavery. That's what Christianity and Islam and every religion you can think of is. It's an institution to keep us enslaved. And that's what it was for. And that's what she's bringing out in this article. Right? Christianity is not some gateway for us to get closer to the Most High. That's right. It never was. It is a gateway for you to remain a slave. Right. White religious leaders strictly controlled blacks' access to religion and cultivated and enlisted black religious leaders to assist in detecting and investigating slave misconduct. Slaves who embraced a religious life told church authorities about formerly private matters handled within the slave community. Read that again. It says slaves who embraced a religious life told church authorities about formerly private matters handled within the slave community. Slaves was ready to tell all black people's business now. Because that's what religion and that's what Christianity, it teaches you to do. It teaches you to involve our oppressors inside of our business. This is what Martin Luther King did. Right. Which the same thing Martin Luther King did when he wanted us to integrate with white society. Some religious slaves would reveal both moral crimes, adultery, theft, as well as political crimes, not working, being rebellious, running. Next slide, please. This right here is a little excerpt right here. I'm going to go ahead and give it to y'all. This is from Carrie S. Walters, right? This comes from a book. I read this book. It's called American Slave Revolts and Conspiracies. It's a good book. You can go to your local library, find this book. Every library in the South should have this book. At least I pray they do. White evangelists compromise the Bible's message of liberation to make Christianity compatible with slavery. First thing it says in this excerpt, Christianity was made to be compatible with slavery. It's made for you to be a slave. They sought to ally the trepidation of enslavers by spiritualizing Christian equality. Spiritual freedom did not change one's status as a free slave. Meaning that becoming a Christian as a slave wasn't going to stop you from being a slave. To reinforce these ideas, white leaders tried to ensure that black Christians never had too much autonomy, meaning too much power, all right? Or too much government over themselves, because they don't want us to govern ourselves, all right? Prior to the Civil War, black and white Christians commonly worshiped together in same congregations. As Charles F. Irons wrote in The Origins of Pro-Slavery Christianity, Sunday morning only became the most segregated time of the week after the Civil War. Before emancipation, black and white evangelicals, typically prayed, sang, and worshiped together. Yet the interracial interaction did not come from the egalitarian aspirations of white Christians. Rather, interracial congregations were an expression of paternalism and as a means of controlling slave beliefs and preventing slave insurrections. And that's exactly what Christianity was for. It was because of their fear of black slaves uprising against slave owners. Give me the next slide, please. There's another excerpt out of that book. I could, is that? Yeah, if you could, just adjust that a little bit so I can see what the top words is. Salaki. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. No, stay just like that. No sweat. I'm going to read it from right here, and then I'll finish it off. All right? And this one, it says, Christian slavery was a polysemic concept at the most basic level. It was an attempt to Christianize and reform slavery. Protestant theologians and missionaries drew on biblical descriptions of slavery as well as the ideal of the ungodly household to encourage slave owners to assume responsibility for the spiritual lives of their enslaved laborers. They also noted that Christian slavery had a long and well-established history in Europe and the Catholic American colonies. As missionaries faced opposition from slave owners, however, the meaning of Christian slavery shifted. Missionaries increasingly emphasized the beneficial aspects of slave conversation, arguing that Christian slaves would be more docile and harder working than their heathen counterparts. This is what Christianity is for, to make you more docile and to make you work harder. Christianity is not a belief, but it's not a path for Negroes, Hispanics, and Native Indians. Right. The truth in the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge is for blacks, Hispanics, and Native Indians. Right? That's right. They also sought to pass legislation that confirmed the legality of owning enslaved Christians. Over time, they integrated race into their arguments for Christian slavery. Since the ideology of Protestant supremacy used religion to differentiate between slavery and freedom, missionaries suggested that race, rather than religion, was the defining feature of bondage. It says, suggested that race, rather than religion, was the defining feature of bondage, which is going to show you that, which is basically telling you that it's because of who you are that you're enslaved. It ain't got nothing to do with your religion. Because what is religion for? What is religion for anyway? It's to keep you a slave. Wow. Give me the next slide, please. Black informant. Now we're going to get into it. So basically, I showed you some examples of how revolutions failed, but I'm going to show you why they failed. I'll tell you what black informant is. All right? I hope y'all enjoyed the little picture. That looks like something from the Boondocks. Right. He look like he about to tell on everybody in that right now. That nigga is telling. Black informant. Whites relied on informants out of necessity because whites were outsiders to the slave community and thus not personally privy to the inner workings of that community. Detection and investigation of much slave misconduct would have been nearly impossible without information from slaves. They saying that we wouldn't have known anything that black people were doing in their communities unless we had somebody who was willing to tell everything, who was willing to tell it all. If whites were unable to access such otherwise secret information, their personal safety, communal safety, financial interests, and ultimately the institution of slavery would have been seriously threatened. White folks were scared, man, because their way of living is having us in bondage. And without us in bondage, they can't be rich.
That's right.
And they can't be safe. So what do? They got to get them a couple of good niggas that's going to tell everything. So they can stay ahead of the game. That's how it works. All right? Consequently, the necessity for protection of white interests was the driving factor respecting the types of offenses or misconduct meriting societal endorsement of slave informant. Commonly, whites sought slave informants to detect and prosecute offenses that could result in the loss of white lives. Additionally, informant was necessary to protect financial interests because slaves could attack or kill their owners. Owner awareness of what was happening among their slaves was a vital preventative measure. Some owners were desperate for information to protect their personal safety. So this is basically telling you that white society just was scared, man.
Right.
They felt like we gotta know what these Negroes is thinking. When guess what? It ain't Negroes you should be scared of. Negroes should be scared of you.
That's right.
You the terrorist on the earth.
Right.
White society is the terrorist on the earth. Black people sitting around in slavery times like, I wonder what they gonna do next to us. Not you sitting back like, well, I wonder what they gonna do to us. Go to the next slide. Martha L. Nelson. This is an example of this last one that last slide. For example, Martha L. Nelson, a slave owner, wrote her state governor seeking her slave's pardon because he was a valuable informant, she wrote. This is what she said. She said, he would inform on the Negroes as soon as any white person would. God damn. She said that he would inform on the Negroes as soon as any white person. You know what kind of Negro this got to be that would inform that would go and snitch on another black man or another black woman as fast as any other white person would?
Right.
That Negro he's sold out.
Right.
That's a Negro I don't want to be around.
That's right.
That's a Negro that can't never make it into the I.S.U.P.K.
That's right.
He would inform the Negroes as soon as any white person would. If he knew or suspected anything wrong was planning among them, I am almost a maniac. I'm almost Salaki. Let me read that again. If he knew or suspected anything wrong was planning among them, I am almost a maniac from a loss of sleep. This woman is losing sleep. She's afraid of niggas coming and destroying her household and killing white folks. We are the boogeyman to her. All right? Now in the depth of the night, I write beseeching you to pardon my servant. Such a servant ought not to be sent away, particularly in these perilous times of insurrection. He got to be one good slave for a white woman to partition the government.
Right.
To partition the governor to release him. That's a good nigga. Next slide. In June 1853 in New Orleans, Louisiana, Albert a slave asked George Wright, a free black, to join the rebellion in the planning. Wright expressed interest and Albert took Wright to meet Dyson, a white teacher from Jamaica. Dyson, trusting Wright, urged Wright to join. Wright seemed like he was committed. But immediately revealed the plot, leading police to Albert in July 1859 in Clarksburg, Virginia. That's Clarksville, Virginia is now West Virginia, of course. A female slave revealed the plot, All right? As with rebellions, research also establishes examples of instances in which slaves betrayed escapees. Disclosing their whereabouts could be serious betrayal. Henry Bibb, a runaway slave, was betrayed not once but twice in 1840. Henry Bibb, a runaway slave, was betrayed not once but twice. In 1840, Lou Chaney, a slave, had organized a mass flight of slaves from Rapids and Oyollas parishes, Louisiana, to Mexico. But Chaney himself revealed the plot to his owner to curry favor. More extreme than mere information disclosure, some slaves went so far as to assist slaveholders in capturing runaways. So in other words, you had some niggas that would go in and help capture the runaway slave. For example, George and Jim, two slaves, were accused of killing Isaac, another slave. Their alleged motive for killing was that Isaac had combined with the white folks to betray George to the sheriff, and it was thought he was engaged to apprehend Jim. Next slide. Black informant promoted by whites caused division and distrust among slaves, and that's exactly what it was for. Black informant, yeah, come, if I could. Black informant did just that. So like, because again, if you have slaves that are willing to tell on other slaves, and there are other slaves that are not going to trust them slaves, man. And so how could you have a nation or an army if you got people that don't trust each other? That there's a level of distrust in it. All right. By now, it is clear that whites undertook efforts to promote informing by blacks, and that some blacks did in fact inform while others refused to do so. There are some people who was like, nah, I ain't doing that. I ain't snitching. Like today, what we say? No snitching? Right. I ain't snitching. I ain't rat. I ain't no rat. Some people decided not to do that. They must be in I.S.U.P.K today. Right. However, uncertainty, the extent of informing, and refusals in other discerning elements, such as who might be more or less likely to inform and under what circumstances, is nearly impossible. Because you never know. You never know who's gonna go and tell. Because when you put that pressure, when you put that fire up on them, then you got to know what's gonna happen. We'll know what's gonna happen. You know what I'm saying? That's why them interrogation methods that they have today in modern America, it sometimes pushes brother to tell everything. But like now, you got to be a real soldier to not tell it with the way that they do things nowadays. Right. They got something called, what do they call it? They got something called waterboarding. I think it's a military thing. Got something called waterboarding where they give you the feeling or the effect of being drowned. Right? To get you to speak up and give up information. They claim that they do it to, I want to say the, so-called terrorists or Arabs or whatever. All right? Now they got methods that'll get you to speak, man. So they was doing that type of stuff with us too. What can also be preliminary gleaned from the data, although more nuanced definitive conclusions cannot be drawn, is that white efforts to promote informing and black informants themselves contributed to division and distrust within and inaction by the black community during slavery. Next slide. Some slaves distrusted their brethren due to their knowledge or suspicion. You ever wonder why like how niggas be looking at niggas nowadays with distrust, like, yeah, nigga, I don't trust you. You know, that comes from this. Right. That comes from this. That comes from Christianity. That's why every time we see a nigga on the street, we be looking at him like, yeah, nigga, all right. Whites intentionally sought to divide slaves and develop a cadre of informants by, among other means, favoring some slaves other than others, rewarding the provision of information and using black religious leaders to detect slave misconduct, and using black religious leaders to detect slave misconduct. They've been using black religious leaders since slavery times. That's right. It ain't no wonder why Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and Martin Luther King are such traitors on this earth, man. It ain't no wonder, because they've been bred to be that.
Right.
That's what's been taught since slavery. You did? By way of example, escaped slave Frederick Douglass emphatically proclaimed the motto which I adopted when I started from slavery was this: trust no man. I saw in every white man an enemy, and in almost every colored man cause for distrust. Douglass probably was not alone in this perspective, although he may have been the most public voice on the topic. So in other words, this is what he's saying. He's saying, I don't trust no man. I don't trust no white man. And I'm gonna find and I find distrust in any Negro man that I see. Why? Because in that time period, and even in this time period, we didn't trust each other, man. We had no loyalty. We had no brotherhood, man. We were disloyal. And that's why we need a revolution like the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge.
That's right.
Because in this revolution, we are going to trust each other, man.
That's right.
We're going to be loyal to each other.
That's
and we're going to go fight with each other, man.
right.
In this hell that we live in. If slaves distrusted each other, then Professor Maurice Jones claimed that the potential for betrayals did more to deter rebellions than the lack of weapons. Information or organization is not surprising. According to Jones, as far as slaves were concerned, and as far as appeared true, rebellions were always betrayed beforehand. It was already assumed that rebellion was done. That somebody had already went and told about it. The many infamous and less well-known rebellions that were squelched due to black informants support this contention. Consequently, it is understandable if many slaves completely avoided rebellious efforts because they reasonably expected their efforts to be unsuccessful. A lot of them couldn't join the army because they believed it wasn't going to happen. They didn't have no faith in it. No sweat. Even for those slaves willing to contemplate organized resistance, the few rebellions that were successful in whole or part reveal how difficult it was to keep a rebellion in waiting from being betrayed and forestalled. Such difficulty could serve as a strong incentive to act. In the next slide. One of the most devastating issues that has kept blacks and Hispanics from collectively and successfully rising above our oppressors and attaining our freedom is the consistency of selling out or snitching, or some form of disloyalty amongst us by our own. A sellout is a person who is willing to betray what they know to be morally right for riches or acceptance into the oppressor's society and culture, even at the expense of exploiting their own people. From the time of chattel slavery until the present day, there has always been those of us who would rather sell their soul to our oppressors for riches, love, or acceptance in the oppressor's world of hatred for blacks and Hispanics. Keep going. So let's examine some of these sellouts. Take notes that all of these are so-called black leaders whose primary religion is Christianity. Let's get some pictures. Let's look at our sellouts today. Creflo Dollar. Create Flow Dollars. I can't believe a nigga name on this earth is Creflo Dollar. That sounds like a pimp.
Right.
All right? He is exactly. You are absolutely right. He is absolutely a pimp. There was one excerpt where he said something about if you don't pay your tithes, then we gonna take everybody out to the back and shoot them, or some maniac nut stuff that he's talking about. All right. Matter of fact, I want to give a shout out to Thabawan for this right here. For this, if y'all give him a hand clap, man. Because he gave me this information. Because I was like, man, I was trying to find some information on something that this man said that I had read in the article, and I could not find a direct quote of what he said. And Thabawan find that at the last minute, man. This brother is an absolute scholar. All right. If you could move that just over a little bit, could you do that? So like it look like it's just kind of. Matter of fact, no, don't do that. Don't even worry about it. I'm gonna come over here and look and read it off the screen right here. If you could just turn that computer a little bit. It says, as the BEST conference illustrated, African American faith teachers adopted a range of strategies for black empowerment. Some assured black believers that they required preliminary spiritual tools. The Atlanta preacher Creflo Dollar's The Color of Love, understanding God's answer to racism, separation, and division, argued this position as he diagnosed racism as a demonic force dividing the church. The only way to defeat racism, argued Dollar, is by discovering the foundation for unshakable faith. Dollar rallied believers around the supernatural power of faith that made each adherent believer, regardless of color, a son or daughter of acquisition. African Americans should not dwell on the past or seek government restitutions for slavery. This is what this Negro said. All right, I'm just bringing this out because if I want to show you, how these religious leaders think, I'm going to show you out of their mouth. This is how they think about slavery. All right, African Americans should not dwell on the past or seek government restitution for slavery. You ought to say, no, I don't want. You ought to say, no, I don't want payment for the government. I don't want to say that a man made me rich. I want God to pay me back. That is what he said. That's what he said. No, I don't want payment from the government. No, I don't want the government to be accountable for slavery.
Right.
That we should just throw slavery under the bus. We should just forget about it. That's basically what this Negro said. Right, don't dwell on the past. Thank you, Thabawan. Don't dwell on the past. Don't forget about slavery. It's one thing when white people say it, but when a nigga get up there and open his big mouth and say that, it hurts my soul, man.
That's right.
Hurts my soul to hear a Negro say that. Forget about slavery. And these are the men that are over us. These are the ones who are misleading the flock, like the scripture says.
Right.
These are the men whose mind, whose mentality, whose psychological understanding of how things went down in slavery comes from Christianity.
Right.
Well-known Christian, well-known mega Christian. He would say that. Next slide. Jamal Bryant. All right. Baltimore kicked Jamal Bryant out of Baltimore. Where he at now? In Atlanta? He down in Atlanta when he opened the church that Eddie Long was over, right? Next slide. Al Sharpton. That man is dying. I don't know what to tell y'all, but that brother is Salaki. The Lord is not with him. Salaki. Next slide, please. Jesse Jackson. They said Jesse Jackson was working for the CIA against Cuba, right?
Right.
Huh? Keep going. Next one. MLK. Martin Luther Sellout King. This is what he said. I fear that I am integrating my people into a burning building. Too late, man. We in the burning building right now. We in that burning building that Martin Luther King created for us, or that he allowed us to walk right into. All because he wanted to integrate us with our enemies.
Right.
All because he wanted white society to love us so damn much. Orgy Mike. Next slide. By the way, all of this comes from black informant. It comes from disloyalty, distrust, hatred that was instilled in us by Christianity. This is a product of it. These are the Negroes that was selling us out. These are the Negroes that was telling and destroying the revolutions.
Right.
While others of us was trying to figure out how to get the hell out of the situation.
Right.
Bishop Eddie Long. All right. I ain't even got to say nothing about Bishop Eddie Long. There's nothing to say. The Lord already dealt with that.
Right.
All right. Next. Louis Farrakhan. Because Islam is not excluded. It's the same filth. It's the same thing that has been destroying us.
Right.
All right? And even he said himself, even he announced himself as a Christian, if I'm not mistaken. When he said his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, am I mistaken?
No.
Huh? Islam, Nation of Islam is still Christianity.
That's right.
All right. Next slide. T.D. Jakes. Next slide. Do they just look greedy and evil, man? Like they sit back and just eat and just they fat, man, and just living fat, and we just poor and just they just some hateful beings, man. It's just ridiculous. I look at these guys. John Gray, prominent pastor, big time pastor out there in South Carolina, especially in Greenville, South Carolina. All right, these pastors, these leaders, so-called leaders, were created by Black Reform, was created by Christianity, was created by all of that wickedness, man.
Right.
Next slide. The condition of Black people today is attributed to the teachings of being subservient, which our oppressors promoted through Christian doctrine. The damage done to our people psychologically through Christianity is responsible for any level of rebellion. You could say that unity of any kind, whether positive or negative, is a threat to our oppressor and are considered rebellion. As our oppressor would rather we rape, rob, and murder our own. That's what our oppressor would rather us do. He would rather for us to hate each other. Right. He would rather for us not to unite. In other words, not have any kind of brotherhood or sisterhood or loyalty in our community. We're better off that way to him. And Christianity is what helps it to happen. Right. Next. For example, on one hand, you have a man such as George Wilson, who ratted on, quotations ratted on, meaning snitched, Denmark Vesey's plot, although Denmark Vesey was standing honorably for the freedom of slave conditions in the South. And on the other hand, you have men like, y'all know him, Tekashi 69, all right, who was accepted into a majority Black criminal organization, but was compelled, based on racketeering charge, to snitch on the leaders of his gang. All right, these are both examples of how Christianity destroys unity of any kind, whether it be in the name of something honorable or in the name of something that's dishonorable in the Black and Hispanic communities. The white man is going to attack us from all directions, no matter what we are doing, no matter what we're involved in. All right, Christianity was made to destroy any sense of loyalty, whether it be something that you're doing evil or something you're doing righteous. Next slide. In the mindset of Blacks and Hispanics, we have adopted a get along mindset. Christianity has weakened us to the point that we have no more will to fight. Instead, we choose to give in to the desires of our masters. Let's think of all of these things that we would be willing to do or rather would do other than join a real revolution like the I.S.U.P.K. Right. Today, we would rather just go march, right? Every year, Martin Luther King Day come around, or whenever they do their little march, everybody's out there marching, right? The Million Man March with Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam. You know what I'm saying? We do things that we'd rather choose to do those things to give into the desires of our masters, all right? Other than snitching, public humiliation, torture, execution, rape, and gifts are other elements of destroying the righteous rebellion out of the Black and Hispanic and Native, Black and Hispanics in the past and today. Next slide. This one, I like this one right here, because every time we go to camp, my brother over there, Officer Abraham, always brings this out inside of his speakings, and I always remember that he brings this out. But this is something called buck breaking. Buck breaking. Y'all ever heard of buck breaking? No. It's not really. All right? Buck breaking. This form of sexual abuse was very popular in the Caribbean, and it involved white supremacists and slave owners as well as merchants raping a male slave in front of the public to embarrass him and make him feel less of a man. We're talking about Christians that are doing this, by the way. Right. This is Christianity. These are people in the name of Christianity. The Spaniards that came into South America and Central South America were Christians. When they went down there and they killed the so-called Boricua Indians, you understand, and you know, our brothers and sisters in the tribes down there, they were doing it in the name of Christianity. Buck breaking became very popular when slave rebellions had increased. They started doing this because of slave rebellions. They've decided that in order to stop slave rebellions, let's buck break some. Let's teach these men and these male slaves a lesson. Enslaved men were first stripped naked and flogged in front of a crowd, after which they were raped by a white man to serve as a warning to other slaves. Basically putting fear inside of you by doing something that heinous. Next slide. Buck breaking continued. On several occasions, enslaved men with families were forced to have sex with each other in front of their family or were raped in front of their sons. Many enslaved men who had gone through the process of buck breaking killed themselves afterwards or ran away and never returned. For the white supremacists, buck breaking either on ships or on plantations was a way of utterly embarrassing the man and showing dominance. Because, of course, if they show dominance over us, we're not going to want to show dominance at all. We're going to be subservient and submissive. All right? Next slide. The house Negro. Y'all heard of that term, the house Negro. Right. During this time, you call somebody who's just absolutely disloyal, you understand, to black people and their mannerisms and the way they talk and how they do things, and as house Negroes, basically. This is what it says. Slaves who worked in the owner's household or performed in domestic roles known as house slaves. So I can read that one more time. Slaves who worked in the owner's household or performed in domestic roles were known as house slaves. During slavery, house slaves were known or reputed to have been willing to do the bidding of white owners, including informing to the detriment of other slaves. All right? So the house slaves were taught to do that. Why do you think that there's such a beef between field niggas and house niggas? Right. Because the house niggas was taught what? They were taught to tell on the slaves, the field niggas, or any slave in that matter. Today, house slaves are still vilified in the black communities, and being called a house slave is a serious insult. Quite possibly, house slaves may be the subject of unfair criticism. All right? Next slide, please. The house Negro continue. Historian Herbert Aptheker opined that spies and traitors primarily came from the domestic class. They believed that the house slaves in slave towns were spies and traitors, basically. He contended that owners encouraged domestics to maintain distance from field workers. So already there's a split, and there's distrust and disloyalty because they are splitting us. That's what they did in slave times. They split us up. They basically taught the house slaves, don't affiliate yourself with the field niggas. Presumably, the lack of connection to other slaves promoted owner loyalty and allegiance to other slaves, and thus a willingness to protect a master's interests. Aptheker's position finds support in both the reporting of unsuccessful slave rebellions and first-person slave accounts. All right? Because of that, because of that split, because of them telling the slaves, the house slaves, to not go near the field niggas and to tell on them, right, it stopped slave rebellions. You know what I'm saying? It caused unsuccessful slave rebellions. All right? Of course, when I say slave rebellions, I'm basically talking about this plight black people coming together saying we don't want to be slaves no more, which is righteous. We don't, even here in America, we don't want to be slaves anymore. That's right. You understand? That's why in the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, we follow the law, statutes, and commandments. Because we're trying to provoke the Lord to come and get us out of this captivity. That's right. That's right. You understand? The house Negro continued. The story I already read that one. Next one. The house Negro continued. All right. Some house slaves did reveal rebellion plots beforehand, allowing the plans to be squashed before getting underway. In South Carolina and Georgia in October 1835, an old domestic slave revealed a plan for rebellion. In East Valencia, Louisiana in December 1835, a confidential servant revealed a serious plot by two whites and a great many of most favored confidential servants, making it all the more disturbing. Denmark Vesey's plot on Charleston, South Carolina was undone in whole or part by a house nigga or house slave. Beck, a young slave girl who considered herself a house slave, testified against alleged members of the Nat Turner Rebellion in Virginia, although she did not betray the rebellion beforehand. Eventually, they pressured her to tell, to snitch, basically. All right. Next slide, please. Ex-slave Henry Bibb. Well, Henry Bibb, after escaping to freedom and writing his story, claimed this is what he has to say about house slaves. The domestic slaves are often found to be traitors to their own people for the purpose of gaining favor with their masters, and they are encouraged and trained up by them to report every plot they know of being formed about stealing or running away or of the kind in which they are paid. Man, listen, that sound like our religious leaders today, man. That sounds like Martin Luther King right there. All right? That sounds like Martin Luther King right now, because Martin Luther King was willing to betray his own people for what? For gain, for favor from the master, for the love, for being able to be looked at as an equal. Man, there's some powerful stuff that Thabawan about to bring out on Martin Luther King, man. I can't wait till y'all we get to that part. That's going to be excellent. I got a scripture for you on that one, Ecclesiastes 7:7. Surely oppression maketh the wise man mad, and the gift destroyeth the heart. Because that's what it does. It destroys the hearts of us when we're giving gifts and we're trying to show favor to our masters.
Right.
All right, next slide. Ex-slave Austin Stewart. Similarly, ex-slave Austin Stewart offered much criticism regarding house slaves. He claimed many of them are the most despicable talebearers and mischief makers. In other words, many of them are liars and they make mischief. He's talking about the house slaves. Your Christian pastor, he is a talebearer and a mischief maker. You understand? Creflo Dollar, T.D. Jakes, Bishop Eddie Long, all of them are talebearers. They're liars and mischief makers, man. Who will, for the sake of the favor of his master or mistress, frequently betray the fellow slave, and by tattling get him severely whipped. And for these acts, he is often rewarded by his master, who knows it is for his interest to keep such ones about him, though he is sometimes obliged, in addition to a reward, to send him away for fear of the vengeance of the betrayed slaves. Next slide, please. The progression of snitching today. So all of that, we're bringing all of that to today, okay? In A Snitching Time by Professor Andrea L. Dennis elaborated on the historical background regarding snitching in the black community and why we should not be too quick to judge some contemporary anti-snitching advocates. Dennis wrote, rather than demonizing members of the black community for holding an anti-cooperative ethic, meaning we don't snitch, no snitching. We got basically the no snitching rule in the streets, right? We might understand that black contestation is legitimately rooted and is not abnormal. Meaning that is something that is rooted into us. There are people, we believe that snitching is an evil thing. Why? Because it has stopped us from becoming a nation before. Right. It has stopped us from being successful in rebellion. So now it's instilled in us, even in the streets, to not snitch. Right. And that if you snitch, there are consequences for it. Right. That's all the way from slavery. Right. Next slide. The progression of snitching today continue. On one hand, some argue that informing and government promotion of informing is necessary to prevent and solve crime, particularly black on black crime, and that penalties for not informing make that decision to inform appropriate, which we know ain't true, right? Because we know why white people arrest us, and we know it ain't got nothing to do with that. We know that informing ain't the reason why they have us snitching on each other. We know that is really just a cop out to be able to arrest us and brutalize us and throw us all in prison. This is what we believe. This is what we understand, because this is what happens. On the other hand, it is argued that informing leads to unnecessary and disproportionate incarceration. So likely that informing leads to unnecessary and disproportionate incarceration of blacks, particularly black men, right? Black informing, it increases what? Us going to prison. The prison population of blacks, right? Invites and contributes to government abuses, such as police brutality and unreliable convictions, which we see a lot of that, especially in the Obama. I don't know about y'all, during the Obama administration, I think niggas was getting whipped upside the head the most. Right? Am I right?
Absolutely.
But he's supposed to be our first black president, right? That was a Hamite, y'all.
Right.
That nigga was an African, not a Negro.
Right.
Invites and contributes to government abuses such as police brutality, I read that part, fractionates the black community by pitting community members, friends, and family members against each other. Which happens in the hood, because once you go and snitch, everybody know you to snitch.
Right.
They know you to snitch, and now what you got to worry about? You got to worry about somebody coming and killing you now. Because in the streets, it's a general rule of no snitching. But the police done put you so, the police done, they done interrogated you so hard, the white society interrogated you so hard, you just felt compelled, you was just too weak, you felt so compelled to tell, and then you go and tell, and now community members, or basically people from your hood, now know, and they coming for you. And of course, the government knows that. Christianity, white society knows that. Because that's what it was made for. And exposes blacks to retaliation that the government is unwilling or unable to prevent, thus making the stakes too high for the individual and community. Next slide, please. And that's the end of my slides. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the host, and I appreciate y'all sitting and listening to my information. We'll have a question and answer at the end.
I'll give it up for one more time. We're going to do now. We're going to take a brief intermission. You understand? I believe is there food on the next door? So we're going to take a brief intermission. If y'all want to get something to eat, y'all can go ahead and get something to eat.